The Kingdom of Greece had only existed for 61 years when its heir Alexander was born in the royal family's summer palace during the reign of his grandfather George I. George had been elected as the kingdom's second king when his predecessor Otto was deposed in 1863. It was a tough job reigning over the new kingdom. To succeed as king of this new Greece, elected sovereigns had to balance the interests of the Greek people and the countries that had helped secure the monarchy's independence in the first place, a precarious arrangement that was born out of the Greek War of Independence. Greek revolutionaries had been fighting against Ottoman rule for 6 years when Britain, France, and Russia signed the 1827 Treaty of London, facilitating the European powers' joint intervention in the conflict, and therefore their joint intervention in the country's future. Although Greece was ultimately declared an independent state by the European powers in 1830, 2 years later, as more civil instability loomed, the Kingdom of Greece was established, and the 17-year-old Bavarian Prince Otto was chosen as its ruler, with no consultation with the Greeks themselves. 30 years later, Otto and his wife Queen Amalia had become deeply unpopular. The pair were deposed, and the search for Greece's next king was underway. At first, the Greek public actually favoured Queen Victoria's son Prince Alfred as their next king, but the 1832 London Conference, convened by Britain, France, and Russia, stipulated that no one from these great powers' ruling families could accept the Greek throne, so Alfred was out. Eventually, the crown was offered to the teenage Prince William of Denmark. William had spent the first few years of his life in relative obscurity by royal standards. That was until his father Christian was designated heir presumptive to the childless Danish king Frederick VII. It couldn't have been expected that Christian would ever ascend the Danish throne. In fact, he was only related to his predecessor through marriage. King Frederick VII was the first cousin once removed of Christian's wife, Princess Louise of Hesse-Kassel. Now, the second son of Denmark's heir presumptive, William, was to be the next Greek king, becoming a monarch before his father and taking the regnal name George. This time round, Greece's king was not only unanimously elected by the Greek National Assembly, instead of just being chosen by the European powers, but George also adopted the title King of the Hellenes, rather than King of Greece. That way, he could claim to assert his rule over the Greek people instead of a physical state. Although the new king's early reign was still marred by political crises, with the country going through 21 different governments from 1864 until 1874, George had the advantage of some pretty powerful royal connections. By 1866, George's sister Alexandra had married Britain's Prince of Wales, his other sister Marie had married the future Emperor of Russia, and his father was now the King of Denmark. George married the Russian Grand Duchess Olga Konstantinovna in 1867, and their first of 8 children, Constantine, was born the next year. As an aside, one particularly well-known son of the couple's 7th child, Prince Andrew, was Prince Philip, who would go on to marry Britain's Queen Elizabeth II. George's eldest son, Constantine, married Sophia of Prussia, the sister of Kaiser Wilhelm II in 1889, and the pair had 6 children, 3 of which would become kings of Greece. Their first son, George, was born on the 19th of July, 1890, and their second son, Alexander, was born on the 1st of August, 1893. They were the first 2 children of a Greek king to be born in the country. Alexander spent his adolescence as the third in line to the Greek throne, after his father Constantine and his brother George. Alexander joined the prestigious Hellenic Military Academy, and as the Balkan Wars broke out in 1912, when Serbia, Bulgaria, Greece, and Montenegro united to push the Ottoman Empire out of Europe, the 19-year-old Alexander distinguished himself in battle in the field of staff of his father. But before the First Balkan War could even end, Alexander's grandfather, King George I, was on his usual afternoon walk when a man rushed up behind him, pulled out a revolver, and shot the king at point-blank range. Greece's king died on the 18th of March 1913 before he could reach a hospital. The timing was unfortunate. George had planned on announcing his abdication during his Golden Jubilee to mark 50 years on the throne that October. George's son Constantine became king at the perfect time. His success in the Balkan Wars, where Greece's territory nearly doubled in size, and the fact that he shared a name with the last Byzantine emperor seemed like an auspicious start to the new king's reign. That was until the outbreak of the First World War, when Constantine insisted on a policy of neutrality, a policy that was spurned by both the Entente powers and the Greek Prime Minister Eleftherios Venizelos, allegedly because of Constantine's pro-German bent. Alexander was not without controversy either. In 1915, at a party in Athens, the king's second son became reacquainted with one of his childhood friends and the daughter of Constantine's aide-de-camp Aspasia Manos. Although Aspasia was a member of the Greek aristocracy, Alexander was well aware that because of Aspasia's lack of royal blood, his family would never accept the match, so the pair became engaged in secret. A year later, Prime Minister Venizelos and his supporters formed a parallel government to the king's, which soon declared war on the Central Powers themselves. After the Entente forces threatened to land in Athens if the king refused to go into exile, Constantine left Greece for Switzerland without officially abdicating, and alongside the rest of the Allied powers, Britain and France once again took charge of choosing the next Greek sovereign. Despite Constantine's eldest son George being the natural heir, the Entente decided that, like his father, the crown prince was far too pro-German, so Alexander was chosen instead. Alexander swore the oath of loyalty to Greece's constitution, even though it was already apparent that the 23-year-old would be acting as a mere puppet king for Venizelos and the Entente. Alexander was under surveillance constantly, and whenever he opposed the prime minister's views, Venizelos would threaten to have him removed in favor of his younger brother Paul. He was practically treated like a prisoner, and one of his few sources of comfort was his secret fiancée Aspasia Manos. Alexander had already confessed to his father that he was engaged, and although both Constantine and Venizelos were hesitant to allow the king to marry a non-royal, his father advised Alexander to at least wait until the end of the war. Eventually, in spite of his family's disapproval, and after 3 unsuccessful attempts, Alexander and Aspasia were married in a secret ceremony on the 17th of November 1919. Although Venizelos surprisingly allowed Aspasia and her mother to move into the royal palace under the condition that the marriage remain a secret, news of the match was soon leaked, and since Alexander hadn't obtained permission from the head of the Greek Orthodox Church to marry as required by the constitution, Aspasia temporarily fled the country to avoid the public outcry. 6 months later, Alexander joined his bride in Paris, where Aspasia's exile was transformed into a sort of honeymoon. Alexander and Aspasia were allowed to return to Greece in the middle of 1920. They had their marriage legalized, but Aspasia was still not recognized as the Greek queen. It was also around this time that Aspasia became pregnant with the couple's first and only child, a daughter that Alexander would never meet. On the 2nd of October 1920, while on a walk around the grounds of the royal family's summer residence Tatoi, the same palace where Alexander had been born 27 years earlier, the king's dog, a German shepherd named Fritz, attacked or was attacked by a Barbary macaque which belonged to the estate's grapevine steward. As Alexander attempted to separate the animals, another monkey bit the king on the leg and torso. Servants eventually arrived to chase away the monkeys, and even though the king's wounds were cleaned and dressed, that same evening the bites became infected, and soon sepsis had set in. Alexander lay feverish and delirious for more than 3 weeks before he died on the 25th of October, just 12 hours before his grandmother, Greece's former queen Olga, had finally been allowed to re-enter the country. Other royals received the news by telegram that night, since the Greek government had prohibited any member of the royal family from tending to the dying king. Alexander's body lay in state in Athens Cathedral until his funeral on the 29th of October, where Olga was once again the only member of the Greek royal family allowed to attend. Alexander's father Constantine was quickly restored to the Greek throne, but he reigned for less than 2 years before he abdicated in favor of his eldest son George II in 1922. 5 months after Alexander's death, his only child Alexandra was born on the 25th of March 1921, and although she would go on to marry Peter II of Yugoslavia, she would never step foot on Yugoslav soil as its queen. To history, Alexander's brief reign has been remembered as a regency. Even on his gravestone at Tatoi, the inscription simply reads Alexander, son of the King of Hellenes, Prince of Denmark.